In this video, I'm going to make this out of trash using only these tools. It all started when I said to my wife, I don't know what to make for my next video. And then she said, what about a bird feeder? You see, there are a lot of birds in our yard, and we really enjoy watching them, but it can be hard to see them without scaring them away. On top of that, they've been making nests in all sorts of weird places. For example, this mourning dove has laid her eggs right next to our front gate, and we have to be quiet whenever we come or go so we don't scare her away. I want to make something where birds can both feed and nest. The only problem is I don't have any money to spend on this, so I'll have to use trash and a bit of creativity to get this done. My first idea was to use this fence post and dried grapevine to make a perching spot. Then I was going to use the cans to make the feeder, but that looked horrible and wouldn't give the birds anywhere to nest. So I did some more thinking and drew this sketch. Then I wondered, if birds had mustaches, where would they go? Under the beak, like it's a nose, or over the beak, like a mouth, or somewhere in between? Then I sketched my idea of the birdhouse. I want to make it like a barn with a stable and hayloft and a silo where they can eat from. With my idea visualized on paper, I got to work. I started by pulling out all of the nails and staples from some fruit boxes, which left me with some good material to work with. This will be the floor of the barn. I marked where I needed to cut, then sawed off the excess. I glued everything together, then started on the walls. I made sure to cut all the wall boards the same length. Then I cut these triangular pieces of wood to use as the corners of the walls. By this time, the birds were getting impatient. Be patient. Fortunately, cutting them in half made for the perfect size, so I only needed to cut 2 instead of 4. I had to be a bit creative with my glue-ups because I don't have any clamps. Then I waited for the glue to dry. The next morning, I could sand down the rough edges and glue the walls onto the base. This project has been 95% sanding and sawing. My arms are tired, I have splinters, my mustache has lost its curl, but I do it for the birds. I got started on the loft, cutting the boards, sanding them down, cutting more boards, wishing I had a power saw, knocking things over and gluing things together, and more sawing, and more sawing, and more sawing, sanding, gluing, sanding, sawing, yeah. And there you have it. The first part of the loft was done. I glued together a few boards to make the doorway. I needed to glue a couple thin pieces of wood underneath it because it wasn't quite flush to the floor. After that, I added some pieces to cover the gaps on the sides. Off camera, I added walls to the loft, 2 on the sides and 1 on the back. I also added a couple detail pieces. There's been a small tragedy. Yesterday, she was there, her eggs were there, and this morning, she's gone, and so are her eggs. That pigeon looked pretty suspicious. But I had more pressing matters to attend to. I sanded down those rough edges, and then I cut some boards to cover them up. I cut off the excess and sanded them smooth. Well, as you can see, some birds have already gotten some use out of it. So I know I said I wasn't going to spend any money on this, but I did splurge and buy some red spray paint, because you can't have a barn without painting it red. No secrets. So what I'm going to do now is paint this white as well as these side pieces and do sort of a white frame around the hayloft window and maybe some detailed pieces here and here. I cut some used matchsticks to make the frame around the hayloft, and after taping everything off, I painted the front. But I don't like it. Even though those little boards took me the longest to saw, I decided the barn would look better without them. I cut some more matchsticks, sanded them down, and glued them up, and then added some details to what would be the barn doors. I got pretty sloppy with the white paint, so I had to go back and cover up those spots with the red. Now it looks much better. I knew that pigeon from earlier looked suspicious. It's taken over the dove's nest, and it even laid an egg. Now we're at probably the most ridiculous part of this project, the roof. I was going to use pieces like this, which I've already cut and sanded, but then Deanna said, "What about making a tin roof?" That's where these come in. However, I don't have any of those handy scissors that can cut through metal. That would be too convenient and easy. So what I have instead is this typical can opener and a knife. I started by removing the bottom as you would normally open a can. Before I end up hurting myself with the box cutter, let me try to cut the can with these. Those did not work. However, they did cut the rim of the can. And as you could probably guess, the knife didn't work either. But I did come up with this genius idea, which actually kind of worked, to my surprise. Yay! Somehow that actually worked, but the edges are really rough. Another update on the pigeon. Apparently, its egg fell to the ground. So that nest has been sabotaged again. And I saw a weird yellow bird eating the egg when it was on the ground.
It was delicious.
So I really need to hurry up and finish this birdhouse so at least some birds can have a safe place to lay their eggs. After seeing a basic idea of how the roof was going to look, I was really encouraged and went ahead and opened up the second can. I really don't recommend this method, but if it's what you got, it's what you gotta use. Then I had to cut some boards to attach the roof to. I got a bit impatient of sawing and broke the thing in half, but it would still work. I need to taper down the edges now, and of course I also got impatient and broke it. So then I sawed it correctly and glued the pieces back together. Then I started to, oh my goodness gracious. Then I started to saw so I actually just broke it in half. Glued those pieces together. Then I began to saw the other piece for, I got a little bit frustrated here, to be honest. And I let out my aggression in a productive way. It was starting to come together, but I still needed to trim one side down. But as I was sawing, the glue came undone, and I just decided one piece was enough. I definitely needed to glue these pieces together, so I carved down the corners to give me more surface area, and then proceeded to do the worst gluing in all of woodworking history. Seriously, this is really, really bad. That's just temporary. So now it should be dry enough to flip it over and glue it for real. Which is just what I did. I carved and sanded down some brace pieces and glued them in place. This hideous thing should now be strong enough for me to put the cans on. But that was easier said than done. Fortunately, I had 3 nails. So I cut them. Fortunately, I had 2 nails. So I cut them and sanded them sharp. But I had a problem. My fingers were too fat to hold the tiny nail. So I glued the nail to the head of the hammer, which to my surprise actually worked. But not entirely. The 2 pieces of can held together, but they didn't stick to the wood. So I added another nail. Then things were looking pretty good. I just had to deal with these rough edges, which would be no problem for my trusty pliers. I am really happy with how the roof is, but just as things were coming into place, they also started to fall apart. Those little nails sort of popped off of the wood and they were just loose in the tin, and then I tried to hammer them down but then broke this here. Oh, brother. So I need to fix those, but once I do that, I can put the roof on. I decided to remove the nails altogether, and then glue the centerpiece of wood onto the tin using cotton balls and super glue. The cotton helps to add extra contact points between the metal and the wood. Then I took the whole piece and glued it onto the top of the barn. As the glue dried, my wife and I used barbecue sticks and glue to make a little fence. I also cut some little pieces of wood to use as corner posts for the fence. After gluing those in place, I also glued on the fence. Then I constructed a little gate. Now it's time for the silo. I found this random piece of plastic which happened to fit this can perfectly. I punched a few holes into the bottom of the can, then added a few pieces of wood to keep the top from sliding off. Then, of course, I painted it all white. These holes are meant for the birds to eat through, but they don't look too good and they're kind of small, so I used this can opener to make things entirely worse. But then I brought in the pliers and somehow managed to do this, which I think is a lot better. Painted everything white again and put it in place. Then it was time to tackle the stand. I removed all the rusty wire from the fence post and sawed it, sanded it, and glued it. I then attached this piece of wood to the top and then sawed the bottom of the post flat. By this time, I was really tired of sawing, so I decided to cut this piece of wood using a special technique I learned in South America. It's called la chancla. I then attached some boards to make a bottom base, but it didn't work very well. Even after trying to reinforce it, it was still really flimsy. So I ripped it all apart and started over. I nailed a piece of wood to the top where the barn would sit on top of. And then I flipped it over and nailed another piece to the bottom. But I had a lot of trouble with these thrice used nails. Even after straightening them with the pliers, they just weren't working. So I gave up on that idea and decided to bury the bottom of the post, which ended up working pretty well. Then I could finally glue on the barn. I took that haphazardly placed nest and put it somewhere safer. Then I sprinkled on some dirt to tie everything together. So, there you have it. It's finally done. It took a really long time and a lot of sawing, but altogether I think it was definitely worth it. I'm really happy with how it turned out, and there's just one last thing to do, which is to stock the silo. Now we wait. Right away, the sparrows went after that popcorn. I like how they grab onto the fence with their little feet. Carlos, on the other hand, didn't get the memo and nearly fell off the roof. Only time will tell if any birds actually decide to live in the barn, but for now I can at least watch them enjoying the field. If you're feeling generous, please leave a like and subscribe, and if you did enjoy this video, I think you'll enjoy this one too, where I decorated my house with trash.